For Theology Corner this week, we're getting very political. We can easily relate it to theology because Christianity has strong opinions on the issue we're going to talk about, but it's more political than explicitly theological. But we're still going to call it Theology Corner because we're going to touch on some theology, I'm sure. But anyway, here we go. Okay, so this week, I'm honestly nervous about this one. I was more nervous before we started the whole podcast, but I feel like I've gotten in a groove. We're feeling smooth here, but we're tackling something real controversial today. I wouldn't say it's controversial among Christians in the sense of like good conservative Christians being divided on the issue, but politically, are we ready? Okay, yes. So this week we're getting a little political, a lot of bit political, but also very important issue. Now, in the world of stand-up comedy, I've seen that, generally speaking, much like Hollywood, you see a lot of left-wing ideology. And this specifically relates to the topic of abortion. Now, I remember there were some pretty rough jokes from George Carlin back in the day. From what I understand, like he really towed the line on abortion and said some nasty things about pro-life people like ourselves. And basically this was pretty common and continuous as I followed stand-up comedy over the years. I've had, it's probably a guilty pleasure of mine in a lot of ways, but I followed a lot of comedians, mainstream comedians with pretty broad senses of humor. And it's probably not always been the best for me, but it has sort of kept my fingers on the pulse of culture at the same time. It's been a trade-off in that there's probably some comedy specials I probably just shouldn't have watched. But I also have heard some things to give me a feel for where things are at sometimes.
Yeah.
And so all that being said, I've started to notice a bit of a trend, particularly as we've moved into this phase with Roe v. Wade being overturned and things like that, where I've noticed some interesting explorations in the comedy bits that some really mainstream favorite comedians and culture have in what they've been doing. And I first noticed this. We're going to start off with a clip from Louis C.K. This is from actually a Netflix special he did before he got in trouble, as it were. I don't know if you heard about all that, but he was off the scene for a while, and this special was taken off of Netflix. I was barely able to find a whole clip of this, but I've censored these, as you'll see, and I will warn everyone right off the bat, like if abortion is an important issue for you as a Christian, like what we're going to talk about here, some of these bits are very crass, and they, at least on the face of it, begin to tackle this issue in a really callous way. But I want to show them because of some interesting things that I think I'm beginning to see, if that makes sense. And I want to see what everyone's thoughts are, see what Caleb's thoughts are. We're going to talk about sort of the logic behind some of this comedy, but I'll say right up front, trigger warning. If much as I hate that term, I think it's warranted sometimes in that some of this is hard to watch because of the way, like, I think all of the comedians we're about to watch here, I have 4 clips. All of these comedians would say that they're pro-choice. And yet they say the things they say here. So are we ready for a little something?
Hello. Thank you.
I'm going to pause it. So are you ready?
Let's go.
Okay. So this is Louis C.K. and this is how he opened one of his last specials on Netflix. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So, I think abortion is,
Now you'll notice it's pretty cropped. I think someone basically cut out a chunk of the screen to even get this clip
Yeah.
on YouTube. But yeah, so he likes to start his specials that way, where it just jumps into something to shock everyone. But okay.
Here's what I think. This is what I think. Here's what I think. I think you should not get an abortion unless you need one. In which case, you better get one. I mean, seriously. If you need an abortion, you better get one. Don't around. And hurry. That's not getting an abortion that you need is like not taking. That's how bad that is.
So there you go. There's a little summary of what, up until lately, the left-wing position on abortion is. It's a medical procedure. It's a normal part of life, basically. Just passing something from your body that we're not going to name. And he's just kind of, in order to be edgy, is just stating it as crassly as possible. So you'd think this is going to be a typical left-wing comedy take on abortion, but let's continue.
It's like not taking. That's what I think. I think abortion is exactly like taking a. I think it is 100% the exact same thing as taking a. Or it isn't. It isn't. It's either taking a or it's killing a baby. It's only one of those two things. It's no other things. So if you didn't like hearing that it's like taking, you think it's killing a baby. That's the only other one you get to have. Which means you should be holding a sign in front of the place.
Thoughts?
He very quickly moved the argument from your typical, I think the argument we've often faced, where it's just a medical procedure, it's just a normal thing, to killing babies. I mean, he kind of makes the argument for the pro-life crowd.
It's interesting. Again, I guarantee, given everything I've heard from him, in every context I've heard him, he would say he's pro-choice. And I mean, he's saying it here, but he's one of the first I've heard do it. And then he suddenly turns and actually states the other side without making fun of them. So notice, let him continue.
People hate abortion protesters. They're so shrill and awful. They think babies are being murdered. What are they supposed to be like? I don't know. It's not cool. I don't want to be about it, though. I don't want to ruin their day as they murder several babies all the time. I don't think it's killing a baby. I don't. I mean, it is. It's a little bit. It's a little bit killing a baby. It's a little bit. It's 100% killing a baby. It is. It's totally killing a whole baby.
Thoughts?
At the very least, I think it's showing in a comedic fashion. We talked about a bit about this earlier.
Yeah.
That they know exactly what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Like that it is an ending of life.
Sorry,
It's a taking of life.
you're not supposed to. Sorry, I'm distracting you with this thing here. I'm trying to look up the
Google. It's taking of a life, and you can do that in a way. Comedy is often a way of stating things, even harsh realities, in a way that we can laugh them off. There's all sorts of comedic bits about the Holocaust. There's comedic bits about 9/11. There's comedic bits about horrible atrocities. I mean, the Catholic Church scandal is fodder for comedians, and it's a way of dealing with harsh realities in a way that we can kind of cope with them. If we can be edgy and talk about these horrible things, then we get people laughing, and we've garnered an audience, and we've gone edgy.
Yeah.
But in doing so, you admit that something is horrible.
And that's what I was mentioning this before, and that I'm noticing we're going to get into some more comedians here where this gets even more interesting. But I honestly have a taste for dark humor. No lie. I see some value in it sometimes, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
But again, a left-wing person will often say they appreciate someone like Louis C.K. being willing to go dark like this. But if their perspective is true, this is not a dark topic. If it's not a baby, this is not a dark topic. And so the fact that he's stating it in the harshest way and getting people laughing, it's like, he's putting. I feel like he's almost saying this because he's fascinated by the laughter, trying to figure this out, and that he just. Well, he's about to say something even worse, but let me play it, and then I'll say what I'm trying to say here.
But I think that women should be allowed to kill babies. That's what I think. They should be allowed to kill babies. Yeah.
There you go. Is that not the most horrible thing you've ever heard?
And to thunderous applause.
Right. And so, what is the audience thinking when they're clapping? Are they celebrating the fact that are they in their minds going, "Yes, this is what's happening, and I'm happy about it"? Or are they saying, "Oh, he's joking. He doesn't really think that. He doesn't really think we're killing babies, and so we're laughing and pretending to cheer to be ironic"?
Yeah, I think it would be. There may be some in the audience who might feel that the second way, but I think for the most part, sometimes you have that moment of thunderous applause, and you could hear people hollering and whatnot, kind of the secular version of amening, because in reality, he's saying what they've wanted to say.
Right. Now, for people who think that's too dark and that can't be what's happening, I showed you an article from Salon from 2013 where a woman says, "Yes, I believe that abortion ends an innocent life. So what? Not an innocent life. She says it ends a life. So what?" And the concluding sentence of it is, "It's a life, but it's a life worth sacrificing." In other words, they are openly saying, like, okay, fine, the science is saying this. In other words, like, if you talk to a pro-choice person and they say it's not a baby, and that's what the science says, left-wing people don't say that anymore in the mainstream. Like, if you read articles and stuff, it's a question of whose rights trumps whose rights. Right?
It's an interesting thing, when you talk about this, like it's reminding me so much of like barbaric civilizations and their disregard for life and sanctity of life, and the easily discarding of humans as not having value. And we've seen that throughout the centuries. But an interesting thing, I think most people are familiar with the term postmodernism and stuff like that, at least is becoming more prevalent in our vocabulary. But I read once an interesting parallel between barbarianism and postmodernism, and that they're very similar in the sense that they boil down to just kind of this thought of "I feel, therefore I am." Maybe modernity, I may be wrong in this, but maybe modernity would have said "I think, therefore I am." And other philosophers have said such things, but postmodernism says "I feel, therefore I am." And I think that gets down to the core of what's going on. Like, why is it a life worth sacrificing? Because it's an inconvenience to me. And so I therefore deem this, I feel that this is a life worth sacrificing because it's an inconvenience to me. Why would a baby ever be viewed as a hindrance to the life that I want to have? And I know that there's people who would answer that in various ways, and I don't want to be uncaring to that. I deeply care about this topic, but it's a feeling-based motivation.
Yeah. Oh, I was going to say something, but you.
I'm sorry.
You stated it well, so I'll continue in some of the themes I'm trying to share there will probably come back, but go ahead.
Do some shots and kill some babies. I killed like 4 babies last night. I just think it has to be one or the other. Like when people say abortion should be legal, safe, and rare. Why rare if it should be legal? If it should be legal, it's. If it should be rare, it's murdering babies. But again, women should be, because 2 reasons I think women should be allowed to kill babies. Number 1, I don't think life is that important. It's just not. It is not.
And now this is why when he goes there, he does make a second point, which I couldn't find a clip that includes it, where he says, I have 2 reasons. That was the first reason.
Yeah.
What he does, I'll talk about the second one, but when he goes there and he just says something awful, life's just not that important. That makes me go back and go, okay, we can look at this in the most dark, depressing light and say, okay, he's celebrating killing babies. And the audience is happy about it too. But the audience does not believe that life is not important. They're laughing at that because they know he doesn't mean it. That's what makes dark humor work, is that if you joke about 9/11 and you can't explain why you're laughing about it, it's because it's shocking and we agree in an unspoken way that 9/11 is horrible. That's what makes dark jokes work, is the agreement in our values. And the fact that they're laughing at him saying life doesn't matter means part of him, I think, is being subversive here. And that there is a depraved side of it, what's going on in some of the laughter. But on the other side, there's a subversive, actually, we're laughing and we can't explain why. It's because we agree this is awful. And to me, that's, while this is a pro-choice bit, it's subversively pro-life in a way even he might not understand. Does that make sense?
I think so.
And so this sort of started, I have 3 other clips, but this stuck in my brain after I saw it, and I was like, okay, some weird, counterintuitive crack in the door is happening here in comedy. Because I've never heard a comedian just do this.
Yeah.
So there's Louis C.K. The second thing he said the first reason is because life's not that important. And second, we see animals in the animal kingdom eat their young all the time. Which, if you follow that logic, they're doing it while the baby's alive, which would mean it would be, if we're actually practicing abortion like animals do, we'd be more like the Greeks who threw them off cliffs after they were born. And so obviously he can't mean that either. So it just enforces the point, So, okay. So Dave Chappelle.
I'll be real with you, and I know nobody gives what I think anyway.
This came out, and this is even stronger. This is where he starts really messing. You see a comedian really start messing with it even further, in that he's not. He again states up front he's pro-choice, but then he does something else.
I'm not for abortion. Oh, shut up. I'm not for it, but I'm not against it either. It all depends on who I get pregnant.
Again, dark, but subversive, because they're laughing because that's ridiculous. He doesn't really feel that way.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I don't care. I'll tell you right now, I don't care what your religious beliefs are or anything. If you have a, you need to shut up on this one. Seriously.
So again, he reels in all of the pro-choice ladies with the typical, if you're a man, you can't talk about this. Amen, Dave. But he's Dave Chappelle's pretty clever. He doesn't let the audience off the hook that easy. With he doesn't make a preachy point without a punchline.
This is theirs. The right to choose is their unequivocal right. Not only do I believe they have the right to choose, I believe that they shouldn't have to consult anybody except for a physician about how they exercise that right. Gentlemen, that is fair. And ladies, to be fair to us, I also believe if you decide to have the baby, a man should not have to pay. That's fair. If you can kill this motherfucker, I can at least abandon him. It's my money, my choice.
And David Wood, a Christian, I think he just left YouTube actually because of all the censorship. But he was a Christian. He was a Christian YouTuber who did like apologetics and debates and things. He reviewed this clip and he said he's using a form of logic and argument called modus tollens. I can't recite the full formula of logic or argument, but notice what he did there. He compares, like, his bit assumes you're killing a baby. Mm-hmm. Okay? Killing a baby is worse than abandoning a baby. Right?
Yeah.
Women fight like heck if they keep a baby for the father to pay child support. And that's a left-wing issue. Right?
Yeah.
And therefore, if you're going to maintain your pro-choice position, then you have to let men off the hook too. It's quite an argument. And he threw it in their faces as a punchline. And then he finishes
And
it off.
stares like that, see, like looking into their souls.
And then he finishes it off like this.
And if I'm wrong, then perhaps we're wrong. Figure that out for yourselves.
There you go. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's dark. It's ripe with controversy. But yeah, I think it's an interesting way to argue, and it leaves me going, okay, he states at the very forefront he's pro-choice, but is he?
Right.
Is he really?
I know he, at least, I don't know if he personally is or remains so. I've heard he's a Muslim. He's obviously a very left-wing Muslim, very Americanized, moderate Muslim. And I doubt his, if he would call himself that, I would doubt his, like, deep commitment, given how, out there he gets with his humor sometimes. I would question how devout he is. But then I know if that's true and he has family who are Muslim, Muslims, I think, are very similar to Christians on this issue. And if that's kind of pulling at him and his family, what he did there is very interesting in that he knows he's talking to a left-wing audience.
Yeah.
And so he plays the game up front. And at no point in that can you definitively say, he said he's pro-life. But he destroys, by implication, the pro-choice position.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. He's not stupid. So again, that was another step sort of in this process. Now, more recently, I saw two clips. There was Andrew Schultz and then Bill Burr did something. Andrew Schultz here, he seems to be reflecting. He's a little more straightforward about it. Now, I'd cut out a lot of his jokes.
We didn't talk about how they're taking away your scoops, ladies. Isn't that up? They trying to take away your scoops? It's unbelievable. I just want to let...
Now, I can tell... Now, listen closely here. I think he was inspired in his setup here by Dave Chappelle a little bit.
Let y'all know right now, ladies, I am with you. I think it's your body, your choice. I agree with you on that 100%. I agree with you when you say that men should have no say in the decisions you make with your bodies. Those are your decisions to make and yours alone. And I feel that way because at the end of the day, when we all go up to heaven and God's like, why are we all killing babies? We're going to be like, y'all. I think they were very clear whose decision this was, God. Man.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thoughts on that?
I mean, in some sense, it's an admission of really knowing what is going on.
Again.
That this is morally repulsive. It's horrible.
Yep. Now, strangely enough, I actually, in terms of like I observe sort of YouTube crossovers a little bit in terms of the YouTube stars out there. He got very big on YouTube through he got very big with comedy through YouTube in a lot of ways. And the people he's interacted with have been interesting. He had Jordan Peterson on his channel once, and their conversation was absolutely fascinating. And he was kind of had all these mind blown moments listening to Jordan Peterson say some relatively conservative things. And then I've watched some of Andrew Schult's comedy. He can be very dirty, and so I've moderated that. I don't follow him as much as I used to. But I've sort of been aware that he's kind of politically savvy, even though he doesn't let on to it. And I think, and so what, before he even gets into his story here, I've cut out a lot of his jokes because some of them are just unnecessarily shocking. I wanted to get to the story he's about to tell because he makes his actual main point kind of underneath the comedy with this story. And I think he reflects with this story what the polls in America actually say. I talked to you about this earlier. Now we're Christians and we're pretty across the board pro-life. Like we really wouldn't bring up acceptable situations where it's okay to take a life. We would talk about ways of preserving the life and respecting all lives involved. But if you poll Americans, people on the left tend to say, well, when you poll Americans, more say pro-choice than pro-life. And that's true if you make it binary that way. But if you poll Americans and say, are you pro-life across the board? No exceptions. Are you pro-choice across the board? No restrictions. Or do you think that you're pro-choice but with restrictions at a certain phase in pregnancy? The majority of people, when you add it all up, would land somewhere with either pro-life or with restrictions. It's actually not the majority that would say zero restrictions. And I think his comedy reflects that perspective here. Whereas I'd say Dave Chappelle's was a little bit more across the board, a little bit more devastating to the pro-life position. But we'll continue.
Yeah, abortion. Abortion, man. It's a tricky one. When I was living in my old place in New York, I lived down the block from an abortion clinic. I remember one time I was walking by the clinic and I saw a father and his daughter outside, and his daughter looked like she was 10 years old. What he was actually doing was protesting the abortion clinic, and I'd never seen it before in real life. It was crazy. So I'm standing outside a clinic right next to this dude who was like very passionate about abortion. I realized I'd never spoken to one of these guys before. So I'm like, I just gotta talk to him. So I went up to him and I was like, hey man, I don't wanna interrupt your whole take your daughter to work day. I think it's great. You wanna spend time with your family. Obviously not everybody here gets that. I go, buddy, I just gotta know, why are you so against abortion? And the guy looks at me, he goes, I'll tell you what changed it all for me. It's these new sonograms. Thank God a few of you guys said, what? We're idiots. I didn't even know they upgraded the sonograms. They completely changed the sonograms. It's not like the, back in the day, look at you and pay your cable. Remember those? Remember the black pay?
Now, haven't we heard that as sonograms have become more accessible and advanced, it's affected the abortion statistics? A lot of women who interact with these have actually decided against abortion.
Yeah.
And some have said that Planned Parenthood, as a result, has kind of tamped down on access to sonograms because it cuts into business. So he's pointing out something that's legitimately talked about.
Paper with the gray clouds on it, those were abortable. Let's just be honest, right? Like, doctor hands you like an Etch-a-Sketch. You're like, not today. Right? See you later, kiddo. But the new ones are HD 4D, not 3D, 4D. You could hear the baby like, keep me. I'm in here. What are you doing out there? That's not where you hang a shirt. So I'm looking at these images, right? And I'm like, man, this is visceral. This is hard to disagree with.
And I think that's actually his position. Like, Dave Chappelle and Louis C.K. kind of cloaked what they really feel underneath the jokes.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's being pretty straightforward here, actually. I think he actually feels like, I've seen him on Joe Rogan and stuff. A lot of comedians today are just like, yeah, I'm pretty pro-choice, but man, if you're getting up to those later months, like, that's just murder. That's crazy. A lot of comedians are saying this. A lot of people are saying this. And I think he's just straightforwardly saying, yep, late-term abortion, bad.
And then I noticed all the images he's showing me are from much later on in the pregnancy. So I was like, hold on. What about early on? He goes, I don't care. It's killing a baby. I'm like, but bro, it's not even a baby yet. He goes, yeah, but if you leave it there, it's gonna grow into a baby, so it's a baby. And I was like, you know what? Your daughter's hot, bro. This guy loses his mind. The f you mean my daughter's hot? She's 10 years old. What the hell is wrong with you? I'm like, yeah, but if we leave her there, she's gonna grow into a woman, Pops. We pedophiles are pro-life, you decide.
Okay. So, I played it in this order because Bill Burr's bit actually addresses that a little bit, which is interesting. But right off the bat, any thoughts about as crass and shocking as that joke is, it's making an argument.
Yeah.
What do you think of the argument?
It's an interesting comparison in the sense that, like, if you just break down, like, obviously remove the crassness of the humor. If you just making this comparison, it's like one of those logical comparisons that you would go, well, of course not. You know, we would never, you would be completely a horrible person if you went after a 10-year-old, and yet that's the logic that he's pointing out in early term abortions. Like, well, I don't know. Maybe I'm just fumbling for words here, but I feel like he's making an interesting comparison.
That's yeah, but it's the difference between age of consent,
yeah,
and existing as a life.
Yeah.
Are they worthy? Is that a worthy comparison? Well, no.
No, not in that sense. But I think in one way you could make the argument that because he's making that comparison, there's a moral obligation to recognize both as evil.
Yeah. Well, the parallel is, if you're going to say that an early term pregnancy is life, then you have to say that an early child is at the age of consent, and that's obviously not a valid parallel.
Right.
But it's for the shock laugh value, I guess. But it's not a valid comparison, but it feels like one because it's funny to them, I guess. I don't know. But here's what Bill Burr has to say about it.
Pro-choice always made sense to me because I don't like people telling me what to do. And I always just like, it's your body. Who the am I to tell you what to do with your body? So that always made sense. All right? However, I still think you're killing a baby. See? That's where it gets weird. It's not a baby yet. That's what they say, which may or may not be true. I don't know. I'm not a doctor, but I'll tell you, my gut tells me that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, this is the interesting thing is, like, the mainstream comedians who have gotten to where they got there because they speak from their gut.
Yeah.
And they've managed to balance that with mastering how to articulate it. Bill Burr, from what I can tell, again, can be a very crass comedian. I've watched some of his stuff. Has said some nasty things about Christianity. But at the same time, I don't think he's playing to, like, people behind the scenes who have a political agenda. I think this is what he thinks. And it comes out both for and against people like us.
It's not a baby yet. That would be like if I was making a cake and I poured some batter in a pan and I put it in the oven, and then 5 minutes later you came by and you grabbed the pan, you threw it across the floor, and I went, what the f***, you just ruined my birthday cake? And then you were like, well, that wasn't a cake yet. It's like, well, it would have been. If you didn't do what you just did, there would have been a cake in 50 minutes. Something happened to that cake, you cake murdering son of a... Right?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think one of the interesting things that stand-up comedy does, that these comedians do over and over, and if you listen to interviews with them, they will talk about it, is they use humor, I mentioned it earlier, to deal with harsh realities.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an admission that this is a horrible thing. And I mean, I don't think it gets really clearer than what he just said. Like, yeah,
Yep.
It's murder.
Yeah. Now, conservatives have jumped on this clip, understandably. I saw, but I did eventually hear some wider context, and he actually pulls a little bit of what Louis C.K. does, both before and after that.
Mm-hmm.
He says, "Look, I'm pro-choice," and he solidifies that again after that punchline. And he goes, "But ladies, I think it's great that you kill your babies."
Yeah, yeah.
But again, is he being ironic and hiding his perspective? Or is he like, because like there is this brutal honesty he has, but there is also this culture of censorship in show business these days, in that if you're pro-life, it ruins your career for a lot of people.
Yeah.
How much of that is behind what's going on here? Like, because like there's the clips I wanted to show, and do you kind of see the trend I'm talking about? And that it's like, these are not ultimately pro-life bits given the people, but there's this odd crack in the door happening now that Roe v. Wade's overturned. It's like, this is interesting. There's this weird honesty happening.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. It is weird honesty of the topic at hand, and whether it's kind of an admission, like I've kind of taken the perspective of, or whether it's maybe the battle of what do we really think about this? Is it murder? Is it not murder? But either way, I still want to seem like I'm pro-choice, but yet I want to be edgy. I want to comment on this social commentary here.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like this, I mean, the gospel is the solution to this.
Yeah.
And we can say that glibly. That's ultimately what's going to change hearts on this matter. And so in terms of the order of events, if we want to be optimistic here, the gospel needs to come first. But when that manifests in the world, I think we're going to see it manifest in comedy. Among many other things.
Yeah.
Comedy goes after the prevailing notions out there. And now that the left, like, it's weird. There's been this transition where it used to be the conservative Christians who were supposedly the culturally authoritarian people with all the power.
Yeah.
And the left went after us, and eventually they got some power. They kind of owned the culture for a while, to the point that they are now the ones with the censorship power.
Yeah.
And there have been comedians who have followed along and been tribal about this. I said this about Eminem in his rap, in that he was really edgy in the 90s. You listen to his stuff, it's just some of it's just downright vile, but he did it to buck the system because we prudish Christians would be upset, and we needed free speech. You know, he stood on free speech. It was his bread and butter. Eminem has not seen, I think, what's happening, and that he's kept his tribe, his left-wing tribe, in his lyrics, from what I can tell. He hasn't switched sides now that the power to censor speech has switched to the other side.
Yeah.
Whereas with comedy, it's a mixed bag. I feel like now that the left has this kind of censorship cultural power, you see these comedians who are more willing to be true to themselves actually calling out their own side.
Interesting.
It's an interesting trend.
Yeah.
To say
I thought in thinking through this, I don't know where you wanted to kind of land the plane on it, but I was kind of thinking through as I listened to these 4 clips, and specifically the first clip that we listened to. What did he end it on? The idea of like life is not important, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And I think that when you really get down to the pro-life movement is specifically from the Christian perspective, why we care so much about this topic is that life absolutely matters. And so I wrote down a few scriptures that I just wanted to hit that I think show that, and then I want to show why that matters. So Genesis 1:27, I think, is the main scripture that I always go to when talking about this. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. So we're made in the image of God. Humanity is made in the image of God. We have the ability to reason, think, and share life in community and to worship. And so we are created in God's image. And when you go through the creation account in the book of Genesis chapter 1 and 2, you constantly see God's love overflowing in the way that he creates, but there's nothing that he creates with more love and attention to detail than humankind. It's his prized creation. And so life absolutely matters. And the life of humans matter to God intrinsically. We are made in the imago Dei, the image of God. Psalm 119:73 says, "Your hands have made and fashioned me." Psalm 139:13-16 says, "For you formed my inward parts, you knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written every one of them, in the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them." So these three passages just show that God not only created life in the general sense of creating life, like, there's some religious beliefs that God created life and stepped back. No, God created life and continues to knit together in the womb every single person that is conceived. And so life is invaluable. It's worth God's attention, so it should be worth our attention. And because we are created in his image, that's why it's such a big deal to us when you start to talk about killing somebody who's made in his image. Genesis 9:6, "Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for God made man in his own image." So God considered this such a major issue that he is saying that murder is such an abomination that the just punishment for murder is a life to be taken. So that's how much it matters. Because we are made in his image, murder, the just punishment for murder is to lose life. And I would say ultimately the reason why I care, and I think the reason why most Christians care, is because Scripture tells us to speak for those who can't speak for themselves. Proverbs 31:8, "Speak up for those who can't speak for themselves. Speak up for the rights of all those who are poor." And so this is where it also takes on multifacets. So I lump into this as well, not just speaking for the unborn, but speaking for those in all circumstances that are in need. It all absolutely matters. And so my heart as a believer is that I am pro-life. I'm opposed to murder. I think, there's broader topics to be had about war and things like that. I'm not pro-war by any means. I think that war at times has become a necessary evil, but there's never a moment where I cheer for war. I don't really support war in that sense. I believe in defending my family. I believe in defending our freedoms here in this country. And that's probably a topic for another day. But life matters. And the call for all of us is to speak up for those who can't speak for themselves. And so I believe that that's why I'm pro-life. Because life is valuable. It is created in God's image, and we're called to stand for it.
Well, I think you brought it home perfectly. I don't think there's another... I mean, there's so many other passages we could talk about, but you hit the perfect ones for this moment, I think. And so I appreciate that.